So, speaking is important, but in a nutshell, I don't think it is as important as listening. But I do believe you probably have to be good at both. Can you relate to any of that I've said? When it comes to speaking, I can think of two particular ladies that I've worked with over the last 20 years. One was unbelievably bright, and this, I'll take you back to 1997. At that time, I was working with one of the big four accounting firms. The managing partner at the time wanted her to be the next managing partner. That would have been the first female managing partner of one of the big four, and this was 97 or 98. And when I coached her, we were on big stages doing lots of stuff. She hated it so much that every single session used to end in tears. And she ended up going, I'm not going to do that. She is now probably one of the most successful non-execs around. She sits on many, many boards, and she's very comfortable doing that. And I was always kind of torn by that, because A, the firm really needed her. The firm really needed her intelligence, and really needed her voice, and really needed her empathy. But she hated that big stage thing, and she couldn't quite get to the point where maybe she was with a really awful coach, i.e. me, and she couldn't. But I always thought, boy, if only she had, because frankly, for that particular firm, the last 15 years has been hell. They have a succession of just inept boys, and I love that client, and it irritates the heck out of me. So I kind of feel that I let her down in some way, but what a shame it was. The other lady I think of was, when I worked with her, she was head of operations at an investment bank, a very senior global role. And she got to that really amazing point where she was completely comfortable in her skin. She wore the wonderful, brightest clothes. She had the most extraordinary handbags. And she was fine. In a world of blue suits and white shirts and Hermes ties and Mont Blanc pens and Toomey bags, she was herself. And it was fantastic. And I thought to myself, what does it take for somebody to get to the point where they're just really comfortable being themselves? And you know, when one of the really arsey boys mistook her for a secretary and said, I'll have 2 sugars, please. She didn't lose it. She was fine. She just put 2 sugars in, bit of milk, there you go. 15 minutes later, when she chaired the meeting, they were a tad embarrassed. But that's the interesting question for all of us is, at what point are we just really comfortable being us? With our sense of humor, our way of dressing, who we are, how we behave at a meeting. Now, I've just observed, only because I'm 57, it takes age. It took me until I was 50 to have the bravery to say in front of all of my clients, which is what I say now all the time, I haven't a clue what I'm talking about. And most of what I'm going to say is wrong. Because how on earth can you distill communication into some pat 3 hours with a few flip charts and lines and arrows? And fortunately, there won't be any chevrons here. And no PowerPoint, but do you know what I mean? And actually, I feel infinitely more comfortable saying to my clients, I haven't a clue what I'm doing, I'm just making it up. But I've got a few thoughts, and I've been wrong enough times so there might be at least 1% of wisdom. And fundamentally, somewhat extraordinarily, they still ring me occasionally, once every 2 years. But I want to pick apart this whole speaking bit. So, speaking, here's you. Badly drawn. Here's your audience. And by the way, I'm referring to whether it's a 1-to-1 or whether it's 1 to 3,000 or 1 to 200 or in a meeting, in a presentation, whatever it might be. How many PowerPoint presentations are delivered across the world every single day? Too many is absolutely the right answer. Would anybody care to put a number on it? Give me a number.
50 million.
How many?
50 million.
Absolutely spot on. Now, here's the interesting question. 5 minutes after they're all over, what percentage of all those decks is remembered? How many people have been inspired to act? 0. What a colossal waste of time of all those poor junior people thrashing away, putting the decks together until 4 o'clock in the morning. All the clickety, 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 clickety. I would call it audience abuse, actually. Audience abuse happening on a daily basis in corporates all over the world, whatever industry you're in. So the challenge I lay before you, ladies, is this. can you please not abuse your audiences? Please, can you serve your audiences? Because actually, when it's done well, this stuff, whatever it is, can serve. It can inspire. It can lift an organization that's down. It can call an organization to change in wonderful and extraordinary ways, but only when you stop viewing it as a platform to show off, which unfortunately is the vast majority of corporate communication. So, what's the ambition? What's the aim? What's the purpose of doing this stuff? I would say it's threefold. Number one, that whatever you communicate and say is understood. That's a you for those at the back. So that actually people get it, they understand it. That if you're in tech and you're talking to the rest of the business, they get it. They don't go, I don't know what they were talking about. Do you know what I mean? That's a basic thing. Number two, that they remember it. Because they might have to tell your story to other people. So that would be a great thing. And last but not least, that you generate action. The spoken word predominantly is designed to motivate people to act, whether you're in an interview for a job, or whether you're pitching, or whether you're a leader. If you haven't got a clear idea of what change you want as a result of you speaking, you're sort of stuffed. And that's one of the great tragedies, because most people treat it as an opportunity to just inform. If you're going to inform, just, I don't know, put it in words, just send it around beforehand, don't speak it. So what's interesting to me is, what are the obstacles that you have to overcome in order to do this stuff well? And these are wrong, but I'll highlight a few. Number one, the attention of the audience. The attention span of a human being 12 years ago was how much? How long do you think? Give me some time.
15 minutes?
15 minutes. Go on. How long?
How long ago?
10 years ago. 12 seconds. Actually, there's a debate about it, because if you happen to have dinner with somebody very good looking, then the attention span would probably be longer. But as measured on that axis, what is it now, 10 years later? It's gone from 12 seconds down to
6.
It's about 8 seconds, actually. How many times a day do people look at those things? Over 2,500. So in the old days, when I was an actor, people would sit there for 3 hours listening to Shakespeare. Fine. Now, people find it impossible to focus for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Now that poses a big challenge if you're communicating, because you have to overcome the obstacle of somebody with their phone there, flicking, looking, looking at their laptops, pretending they're taking notes when they're not really. All of that stuff, that's a real challenge. Now, that's a great thing, actually, because it means that if you do it well, and you get their attention, you can hold their attention, and you can be different. How do you grab attention? There are lots of ways to do it. Surprise. The truth is, if you presented naked, that would grab attention. Don't do it, and don't say I said to do it. And if I think of some of my male clients, I would pay them money not to do that. But I think there is one pure way of grabbing and holding attention, and that's to understand the obsession of every single human being. If I showed you one of those old school photographs that your parents paid a huge amount of money for, do you remember the ones? Little people standing, sitting, squatting, with a ball, without a ball, with a hockey stick, I don't know, whatever it might be. Let's say you haven't seen one for 10 years. You go up to the attic, you bring it down, you open it up. Whose face do you look for first in that photograph? What fundamental and deep truth does that tell us about human beings?
Self-obsessed.
We are completely up ourselves. We find ourselves infinitely more interesting than we find anybody else on the planet. Now, this is really interesting to me, because here's your audience. In the middle of their world is this little word, me. Actually, we know a little bit more about human beings. We know that every single human being in some way wants to avoid hell and get to heaven. Let me explain. If you're a theologian, hell is hell and heaven is heaven, unless you're a Lutheran theologian arguing with a Catholic theologian. If you're my daughter, who's at uni with 12 weeks to go until her finals, hell is right now. Because she's a kind of, if it's there with 5 minutes to go, I'll get round to doing it sort of a person. So the idea of having to revise every day for the next 12 weeks is literally her idea of hell. Heaven is, the last exam has just finished. And some of your friends are going to throw stuff on you and throw you in some piece of water, I think is the tradition in that place. If you happen to be a trader in the city, hell is getting to the end of the year and being told that your bonus is 0. Heaven is you get a bigger bonus than anybody else on the floor, and you can buy another helicopter and something red. So whatever it might be, here's the really interesting thing. Speaking begins with understanding an audience. What is it they want? What is it that they're terrified of? And just, has anybody ever read Danny Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow?
Yeah.
Great, fantastic. He won a Nobel Prize for figuring out that people are 3 to 4 times more motivated to avoid hell than they are to get to heaven. But the really interesting thing for a speaker is to understand this. Here's you. You also are interested in me. You've got a message to communicate, stuff to communicate. I believe it's really, really foolish to believe that just because you're talking, your audience is going to move their world across to become as interested in you and your world and your story and your slides and your deck and your messages as you are. And the really wise speaker deeply understands their audience. They deeply understand what they're terrified of. They deeply understand what they want. And they move their story across. And they find this bit. And this bit, I'll give it a word, forgive the writing, insight. Insight is those moments, I kind of go to church on a Sunday, and unfortunately you have to listen to people talk. And when I listen to people talk, occasionally I have this experience. I go, what they're saying directly relates to me and my life in a profound way. Of all the presentations that you have ever sat through in your career, what percentage of the time have you experienced that? Give me a number from 0 to 100. 1?
3.
3? Great. The average that I've heard for 20 years is 5. 5%. What that tells me is this. 95% of what most speakers witter on about is stuff that they find absolutely fascinating, which is utterly irrelevant to their audience. Let's call it information, or to be a little bit ruder about it, blah, de, blah, de, blah, de. Can you relate to that? It's just a really interesting challenge for you in whatever role you're in. And whether you're in a meeting or whether you're presenting, or how much of the stuff that is coming out of your mouth serves the audience? How much of it directly relates to the audience, or is it your stuff? Because the truth is, under the age of 50, most meetings are full of people just making noise in a way, in a desperate hope that they'll be impressive. And here's my challenge to you, please don't be like that. You don't have to, just because they do it, men or women by the way, you don't have to. And it's fine. Because actually, when people get really senior and they're sort of the chairman, they hardly say anything, but when they do say something, it's profound, and it's true, and it's thought out, and you don't have to reach the age of 73 to be like that, I think, maybe. So, if we're after insight, which is the ability to connect our story with other people's ambitions and their fears, how can that stuff be remembered? How do human beings remember anything? That's always interested me, it's intrigued me. So I'll give you some things to remember, and all I'm interested in is what is going on between your ears. So I'd love you to remember, if you can, the bedroom that you grew up in as a small child. I'd love you to remember the first car you ever bought. I'd love you to remember what's on your bedside table at home.